Hello and welcome back to my channel and part 5 of my Val Lewton retrospective, in which I'm going to try and convince you that a 69-minute film called I Walked with a Zombie is one of the darkest, most complex, most ambiguous films ever to come out of Hollywood. How does it start, this movie, which has got zombie in the title? It starts with this extraordinary image, something out of a love story. Two people walking along a beach with this beautiful sunlit sky. The sun is going down, it's sunset, there are clouds. It's so romantic. Who's she walking with? Is she walking with the zombie? Nowhere in the story will she ever walk with this zombie. Yet in this opening shot she does. Where does this shot come in the story? That's something to think about. But she's walking, along this beach, the lead actress of the film, in this beautiful sunset. It's the start of a love story. And over this shot comes a voiceover saying, I walked with a zombie. And then there's a slight laugh. The whole tone is of a romantic drama. And it's interesting because the drama that we're going to be pitched into has a lot in common with Jane Eyre. This woman who walks with a zombie is a nurse. She's going to be contracted to come to an island in the Caribbean to look after the ill wife of this kind of Rochester type figure, this kind of rather sour, grim, cruel man. And she's going to fall in love with him. This even has a mad woman in the attic like Jane Eyre, except that she's in some kind of tower. I don't know what a tower is doing on this island. It seems a bit out of place with this very modernist house. But anyway, she's in a tower, right? So there's a kind of Jane Eyre feel to it. And there's a kind of weird coincidence here because Edith Barrett, who plays brilliantly the mother character, Mrs. Rand, she was actually in the 1943, the same year, the adaptation of Jane Eyre with Orson Welles. Bit of a weird coincidence. She plays Miss Fairfax, Lady Fairfax in it. And this film is a love story. Okay, it seems to be a horror movie, but actually it's really a love story. It's about how the nurse character played by Frances D, a wonderfully modern presence. What happened to Frances D? She's so good in this film. But she's the nurse, and Tom Conway, the psychiatrist from Cat People, is the Rochester figure, and he's brilliant in it. He's so good in it. And they're falling in love. But there's another love story. And that love story is between the wife of Tom Conway, who's become catatonic. She's had some kind of fever, and now she's sort of sleepwalking around like a zombie. Maybe she is a zombie. And Tom Conway's brother has been in love with her, and there's a suggestion that in the past they tried to have an affair, which Tom Conway tried to stop. And this may have led to a breakdown in his wife. So there's two love stories. And as we're going to see, this is a story of sacrifice. The nurse tries to sacrifice herself. She's fallen in love with Tom Conway, so she tries to heal the wife and bring her back to him. Meanwhile, the young brother will sacrifice both his wife, he will kill her and to put her out of her misery, and then he will take her body into the ocean and drown them both. In a scene that recalls, if you remember, Isle of the Dead, in which the catatonic woman is thrown into the sea. It's interesting, there are so many parallels between this film and Isle of the Dead. Isle of the Dead is almost like a weird remake. Once again, we have an island, which is an island of death. It's marked out as this from the very beginning of the film. Tom Conway's character, there's a brilliant scene, it's very strange. There's a voiceover, Frances D's voiceover, and she's looking out from the boat, taking her to the island. She looks up at the stars, and she says, it's so bang. And then the diegetic dialogue cuts in, and Tom Conway goes, beautiful? No, it's death. The flying fish that you see, they're jumping from other fish that want to eat them. All the glittering on the sea is dead bodies that are decomposing. So from the beginning, we're in an island of death, just like the Isle of the Dead in that film with Boris Karloff. And then we go on to the island, and this is where the film starts to weave its dark magic and show its real intelligence for what is rather a cheap B-movie. We have a conversation between Frances D and one of the local inhabitants, and we find out that this is an island which was a centre of slavery, and that most of the people on the island are the children the descendants of slaves. So much so that when a baby is born, they cry in mourning and they celebrate when someone dies. For them, this is not a free place. It is a place still of oppression, of death. It's an extraordinarily sensitive film about that subject, actually. It's always there in the background. You know, the truth of this sort of living death. Again, linking back to the Isle of the Dead film, this kind of idea of living in death or death in life. But it's something that the whole island is absorbed by. It's absorbed by its history and its past. And at the centre is this white family who've been the sort of governing business family of the island. And they're also living in a kind of death, with the wife catatonic, the two men who've been in love with her, you know, lost and cold towards each other. It's an extraordinary, weird environment. And into this environment comes this character, again played by Sir Lancelot, a West Indian actor who appears in all of the films. And again, he plays a chorus figure here. And he does these songs which tell the truth of the history of the white family, the Rand family. And what's interesting is that he moves from being an innocent figure to a rather aggressive figure. It's an extraordinarily sensitive movie about the sort of that racial tension in a place of ex-slavery. It's something that will anticipate the sensitivity with which Jacques Tourneur will treat the racial issue in America in his film Stars in My Crown, a Western starring Joel McCrea, in which Joel McCrea has to break up a lynch mob at one point. And Tourneur often spoke about it being his favourite film. And in some ways you see Tourneur's sensitivity to these issues in this film. And for those of you, who've seen the film, consider that although we start with Francis D's voiceover, which goes all the way through the film, we don't finish with it. Usually when a film starts with a voiceover, it closes the loop, right? It bookends. But this film finishes with the songs of the local inhabitants of the island. They have the last word. A really intriguing feature of this film, and a clue to Tourneur's sensibilities and his empathies, I think, and the true darkness of the film. Frances D does not get the last word. She ends up in Tom Conway's arms, but Tom Conway has said to her about 5 minutes before, "I'm a cruel man, I will ruin your life." So there's an ambiguity there. Will they really be happy? And his brother could only find peace for him and his lover by committing suicide and walking into the sea. This is an extraordinarily dark film to come out of classic Hollywood. The symbolism that we found in Isle of the Dead is back. Our old friend Arnold Bocklin and his painting Isle of the Dead. It's on the wall in the wife's room. Look out for it. There's also that thing of, superstition as some kind of disease. Tom Conway's character actually calls it contagion. And throughout the film, it infects this white family at the centre of the island. So we later find out that the mother character has almost started to believe that the wife is a zombie, that she did actually die. And this contagion, this sense of belief, which is also shared by her younger son, who's in love with the wife, has actually generated the actions which the whole film revolves around. So Frances D, she eventually starts to believe that voodoo and zombieism is real. So in the great set piece scene of the film, an absolute masterpiece of direction by Jacques Tourneur, just one of the great scenes in horror cinema, she takes the wife through the fields to the voodoo centre. This sequence is so atmospherically shot, and it's helped by the presence of two fascinating actors who don't speak in the entire film. One is Christine Gordon, who plays the wife, who has an extraordinary gaunt face, and the other is Darby Jones, who plays the zombie of the title, an extraordinary presence. And the way the sequence works is they walk through the fields, and what happens is you see something in silhouette with a noise. Then they stop, look, and then the light goes up and they see it for real. The way Tourneur is directing there is there's the spookiness, the mystery of not seeing something in the dark. Then you see it, it's lit up for you, but then there's the mystery of what it means. The whole film works in that register. It's setting up an atmospheric weirdness that you don't understand. Then it shows you what the situation is, but then you're left with the after effect, the ripples, the disturbance of that concept. Anyway, she goes up through the fields. She meets Carrefour, the zombie that protects the home fort. Interesting little touch, isn't it? You know, where the white family live is called Fort William. Where the voodoo people have their ceremonies is called Home Fort, linking them in the mind, subconsciously in the mind of the viewer. One is a sort of weird mirror image parallel to the other. Anyway, power in the island. So they go through and they meet Carrefour, but she doesn't notice that her symbol, which protects her, gets brushed away by the grass. One of the great moments in horror cinema. It gets me every time. And they walk off, and they get to this voodoo encampment, and they see the voodoo ceremonies. And there's a doorway where they can talk into the door. They go up and they ask a question, and a white arm pulls them in. It's the mother. She's been a doctor operating a dispensary, but she's realised that unless she goes along with the traditional beliefs of the islanders, they won't listen to her. And so she's installed herself right in the middle of Home Fort as the voice of their god. A brilliant comment on two things. It's a comment on white imperialism and how colonialism works, how it sort of, takes over the infrastructure of the country it comes into and plays it to gain power. But it's also how religions work. So, for example, when Christianity came to the UK, they would build their churches, but on the back doors, they would put little signs of pagan goddesses, sometimes with their legs open, very, fertility symbols. And so encouraging the pagans to come in because this was a place of their goddess, right? And that's what she's doing. She's playing the game of voodoo in order for them to get to take her medicine. And the reason she's done this is because she felt that she was responsible for what's happened to the wife. She felt she caused the wife's breakdown. So because she's been infected by the contagion of the local superstition, she's actually set in train all the events of the film. Watch how Tourneur directs her realisation at the end that she may have been wrong. It is an extraordinary sequence. Here's this woman who basically has, like a puppet master behind the scenes, guided all that's happened in the film. Then she realises she may have been wrong. Tourneur takes time over this. In a 69-minute film, right? She walks back up the steps, one level, landing, one level, through a doorway. It's a very strange shot. Normally when we see people walking upstairs, they're walking, allegorically to heaven, to realisation, to enlightenment. She seems to be walking away in desolation. It's a very strange shot. This is the strange darkness and ambiguity of this film. Going back to Isle of the Dead, you'll remember that what happens in Isle of the Dead is the superstitious old Europeans have to they have to die in order to liberate the young American couple. Once again in this film, we have a young American couple. We have the nurse and we have the younger brother. We have a European who's Tom Conway. He's bitter, he's cruel, he's sarcastic. But intriguingly in this movie, and uniquely in the Val Lewton movies, the Englishman, the European, and the young American, she's Canadian actually, they pair up. They're the future. The young American man sacrifices himself. So uniquely in this Val Lewton film, the old ways, the old superstition and the new freshness come together. Though of course, as I've just said, that's left ambiguous as whether it's going to work. That's the darkness, the strangeness of this film. It's a film laden with weird symbolism. Throughout the film, it keeps cutting to a statue of Saint Sebastian, the one who had all those arrows in him. And one of those arrows is pulled out to symbolically kill the wife at the end. And before this, a key scene is Tourneur stages this scene where Tom Conway's character, is trying to argue, no, look, this is just a medical condition my wife has got. But the younger brother says, no, she is affected by the voodoo, she's died. And this whole, Tourneur directs it so that the whole conversation is played through some gates. So that, symbolically they're on different planes of, geographically, but also metaphorically, philosophically. And there's all sorts of plays with that. I think Tourneur's direction in this film is absolutely fantastic. My God, I think he directs it brilliantly because it's so cheap, right? It's such a short little film, but he wrings every bit of beauty out of it. Not just the incredible photography, but also the simple choices. When people talk about great direction, they talk about all the fancy stuff, amazing set pieces and all this kind of brilliant sort of dolly shots and panning shots. But sometimes it's just simple decisions. When Frances D first comes to the house at the beginning of the movie, and we have her voiceover, you just get some simple shots of the house. The sitting room, the lounge, her bedroom. Shots of memory, of a place that mattered to you. And it's so simple, but it's so right. That's what a good director understands. They know when to set up the set piece, but they also know when to hold back and keep it simple. Tourneur's direction in this film, it's so beautiful, it's so perfect, while being almost effortless, seemingly effortless. Ultimately, this beautiful film is again about a modern protagonist facing old world horrors, right? We even have a woman sobbing at night in a house, that classic old aristocratic house cliche, and a woman with her candle going to find out who's crying. All this stuff is there, but presented in this new modern way. I think I can't put into words how much I love this film. It's so simple, yet it stays with you, and the more you think about it, the more darkness and ambiguity comes into it. I think it's quite brilliant. I'd love to know what you think about it below. Thanks very much.